Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you're a dedicated researcher, maybe a scientist really trying to push the boundaries or even just a deeply curious intellectual, what our sources today might call a Gnani, you've probably segmented your world.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost a requirement of the job.
Right. On one side, you've got the lab, the rigor, the hard data, all the technical stuff. And then way over on the other side, you have this realm of deep spirituality.
And that's a realm that often gets dismissed. It's seen as, non-quantifiable, maybe irrelevant to the real pursuit of objective truth.
Exactly. They're seen as incompatible.
Fundamentally, like oil and water operating on totally different assumptions.
But today, we are diving into some really fascinating source material. It's translated from a rich Telugu context, all about this interplay between science and spirituality. And it doesn't just suggest these fields can be integrated.
No, it goes much, much further than that.
It argues that true, world-changing, disruptive innovation, those huge scientific breakthroughs, they aren't just helped by a spiritual connection. The claim is that they are literally impossible without it.
It's an incredibly bold claim, and it totally redefines what it means to be an intellectual. And the sources, they're really clear. This isn't about adopting a religion, or faith in that traditional sense.
Not at all.
It's presented as a precise, almost technical framework for optimizing your own intellectual capacity. It's about treating the mind like the ultimate research instrument that needs to be tuned to a universal frequency.
It's like an internal systems upgrade.
That's it exactly. An upgrade required for maximum output.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack this radical idea. We're looking at sources that say the key to accelerating research isn't, more funding or better equipment.
Which is what everyone assumes.
Right. Instead, they say it's the conscious elimination of a single, powerful personal concept. They advise you to just drop the word I.
And we're going to define what self-knowledge actually means for a scientist. We'll look at how these ancient texts, the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, are presented not as religious books, but as, technical operating manuals for the mind.
And finally, we'll explore this amazing metaphor they use, equating the refined intellect with Lord Krishna himself. It's a radical blueprint for the modern researcher, for the modern Gnani.
A clear roadmap. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive deep into this idea of moving beyond our own limited power. All right, so let's unpack this. The source material goes right for the jugular, you could say. It identifies what it sees as the main bottleneck for researchers all over the world.
And it's not a lack of intelligence?
No, not at all. These are brilliant people. They have vast knowledge. They put in incredible effort. They could focus for years on a single problem. But when they finally get that breakthrough, they almost always credit it to two things: science's greatness and their own personal hard work.
Which seems logical, right? It seems humble, even. But the source describes this as a kind of intellectual ego trap. It's a deeply limiting mindset.
Why limiting? I mean, isn't it just giving credit where credit is due?
Well, what's so fascinating here is the assertion that, yes, personal knowledge and effort are absolutely necessary. You can't do without them. But they are inherently limited.
Limited because they're personal.
Exactly. They are restricted to the finite energy and the cognitive capacity of one individual, one body, one mind. And we tend to think of effort in terms of, hours logged or papers read.
Right, a quantifiable stuff.
But the source material is talking about energy on a much, much bigger scale, almost a cosmic scale.
So a truly groundbreaking discovery, the kind that changes a whole field or helps billions of people, that can't be sustained by just one person's effort.
That's the argument. It requires connecting to an energy source that is just vastly larger than the individual self.
Okay, and the sources, they actually define a kind of hierarchy for this energy flow, don't they? It starts with the world we can see.
It does. It says all tangible achievement, all matter, all the physical laws we study, they all trace back to what it calls Mother Nature, or Prakriti.
And it's important to understand Prakriti here. It's not just like trees and mountains.
No, that's a critical point. For the Gnani, the scientist, Prakriti is the manifest, quantifiable energy of the universe. It's the physical laws, the material substances, the entire observable reality that a scientist studies and manipulates. It's like the fundamental operating system of creation.
But it's not the ultimate source.
No. The source is quick to point out that Prakriti itself is brought forth and sustained by an even higher, unmanifest power. A superpower, or high power they call Bhagavan, or God.
So you have this crucial energy flow. The researcher's effort interacts with Prakriti.
And Prakriti is powered by the superpower. So if the researcher only credits their own human effort, they're essentially ignoring the two biggest engines that are driving their success.
They're only seeing the last step in the chain.
Precisely. And if a researcher wants to invent something truly beneficial, they need this incredibly strong resolve, a focused intent, which the sources call sankalpa bala.
Strength of resolve.
Yes. And that resolve acts like a directional antenna for the energy they need to pull in. But even the strongest personal resolve has to be supplemented by Mother Nature's help, by Prakriti's help.
You can be as determined as you want, but if the universal system doesn't cooperate,
You hit a wall, an insurmountable wall. And this is the crux of the limitation. If you only rely on your personal resolve, your energy is finite. It's like trying to run a supercomputer on a single AA battery.
the processing power is there, but the power source is just woefully inadequate.
Right. And that's why the energy required for these major breakthroughs is identified as universal energy.
And this is where it gets really interesting, and I think maybe a little controversial for the intellectual who's listening right now. Researchers are advised, to immediately and consciously set aside the notion of, I am doing this. So why? Why this radical dismissal of the ego in a field built on personal merit and intellectual property?
Well, the answer they give is actually very pragmatic. It's not purely philosophical. The sources state pretty explicitly that personal energy levels are simply insufficient.
Not enough juice in the tank.
Not even close. They can't sustain the intense focus, the intellectual stamina, the sheer energetic output required for major disruptive breakthroughs over a long period. That limited energy is what leads to burnout, to errors, and ultimately to just failing to reach that discovery threshold.
So the ego isn't just an obstacle to enlightenment. It's a physical, energetic drain on your actual performance.
Absolutely. The shift has to be a conscious one, moving away from the delusion of I'm doing this and embracing the understanding that the work is being done through you.
Facilitated by this higher power via Mother Nature.
Right. And when the researcher sees themselves as a conduit for universal energy, not the source of it, that's when their potential becomes, well, limitless.
And the source material gives this really profound historical example to make this feel less abstract. It's about Swami Vivekananda's famous speech in Chicago.
The 1893 Parliament of World Religions, we all know that iconic moment. He gets up, he says, "My dear sisters and brothers," and the place just erupts.
An electrifying response. But the source claims that this overwhelming applause, this global validation of Eastern philosophy, it wasn't just due to Vivekananda's personal skill as an orator.
As phenomenal as it was.
As phenomenal as it was, the claim is much more radical. It says that the Atma, the soul of Bharat Mata, of Mother India, actually came through him in that moment.
Which is a staggering interpretation. It implies that Vivekananda, the individual, was a vessel.
A channel.
A channel. Yeah. And the true power behind that speech was the accumulated energy of thousands of years of spiritual endeavor. The discipline, the realization, the sankalpa bala of countless rishis and maharishis.
All of that collective spiritual knowledge was funneled through one person at one critical moment on a global stage.
Yes. That vast universal energy is what empowered the individual act. Now, think about the implications of that for a modern researcher.
Right. If a speech requires channeling that much energy,
what kind of energetic requirements are there for splitting an atom or creating a vaccine or proving some incredibly complex cosmological theory? These tasks, the source argues, inherently require you to access and stabilize a universal current. Your personal resources just aren't enough.
So the moment you shed that I am doing this mentality, the ego that wants the credit, and you consciously recognize the need to connect to that universal energy.
That's when you move from limited to limitless. It's about becoming a perfect conduit, letting that current flow without the resistance of your individual ego.
And that, according to the source, is the first great hurdle for any intellectual. They have to accept that the source of the energy they need is outside their limited self, even if the action of discovery is still their responsibility.
And that realization is what opens the door to the next crucial step, which is self-knowledge.
Okay, so this leads us right to the big intellectual sticking point, right? The pragmatic researcher, the scientist, they often look at spiritual books and just see them as irrelevant to their work.
Completely. Their whole mantra is often some version of work is worship.
Which they interpret as, I don't need all this philosophy. I just need to be diligent in the lab and trust the empirical facts.
And this is a fundamental misunderstanding, according to these sources. It forces us to ask a really important question that they tackle head on. What is God or spirituality in this specific framework?
And the definition they give is, it's very functional.
Incredibly direct. God isn't defined as some external, judgmental being. God, in this context, is fundamentally about knowing yourself. It's the ultimate act of self-discovery, of internal mapping.
So the whole definition of spirituality shifts for the intellectual. It's not about ritual or devotion to an outside deity. It's an intense exercise in internal engineering. It's profound self-discovery as a scientific prerequisite.
Absolutely. And the sources lay out a very direct consequence for neglecting this self-knowledge. If you don't truly know your self-meaning, you still identify primarily with your limited physical body. You operate with limited powers.
Your research will face friction, delays. It's like the operating system is running on low power mode.
Exactly. The work might not happen perfectly or right away because you're running on that limited perspective. And that perspective is tied directly to this common human identity. I am the body.
The focus is on the physical, the temporary, the emotional vessel, and that inherently limits a researcher's potential because the body gets tired, it gets sick, it feels fear.
Yes, and the spiritual path is presented here as the necessary antidote to that limitation. The whole goal of using these texts is to systematically activate the understanding that goes beyond the body.
To get to the realization, I am the soul, Atma Swarupam.
Right, and that shift moves the researcher's core identity from the finite, the diem, to the infinite, the Atma.
So what does that practically unlock for a researcher in the lab? If you know yourself as unlimited, what changes?
Well, a few things. First, resilience. Just incredible resilience. Knowing the self reveals that you are fundamentally unlimited and you can sustain effort through repeated failure. Second, true confidence.
Not arrogance.
No, not ego-driven arrogance. It's an unwavering inner certainty that the discovery you're seeking is possible because you know your energy source is universal. And third, perfect focus, because all that internal turbulence caused by ego and anxiety starts to quiet down.
So the spiritual text is like a user manual for the highest possible configuration of the self.
Right.
It's effectively upgrading the core hardware of the scientist's mind.
Yes. The spiritual path, in this view, is the activation of latent power. It's not a distraction from research, it's a prerequisite for achieving maximum intellectual efficiency and excellence.
Think about it. A scientist is already disciplined, they're knowledgeable, they're goal-oriented. But if they're operating under the belief that they're just this limited physical body,
they're imposing artificial boundaries on their own capacity. By activating the understanding that they are unlimited, they dramatically increase their capacity for focus, for creativity, and for resilience against all the failures that are just part of the research process.
and this activation is presented as necessary for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're in physics, chemistry, bioinformatics. The field is irrelevant.
The subject of the research doesn't matter. The tool that executes the research, the mind and the intellect, that's what has to be optimized first.
This shifts the whole endeavor then. It's no longer an external struggle, fighting for grants, battling with data. It becomes an internal refinement.
Exactly. The limitation is never the problem itself. The limitation is the restricted perspective of the person observing the problem. Self-knowledge removes that restriction. It gives the intellectual this foundational platform of certainty. If you know you're unlimited, the hurdles in your research just seem less daunting.
Because you realize your resources are greater than the immediate problem?
Precisely. And this foundational knowledge, this self-activation, it's not something you get passively. It requires rigorous intellectual engagement. And it sounds like the first text prescribed here, the Bhagavatam, is the main tool for achieving this deep self-activation. That is exactly the roadmap. Once the researcher accepts the need for universal energy and this shift from Dayam to Atma, they need a tool for intellectual discipline.
And the source details that the Bhagavata Purana, which many people think of as just a collection of devotional stories.
Right, just history or mythology. But it can be approached in three very distinct ways, and it depends entirely on the reader's goal and their intellectual sophistication.
And this categorization is so important because it tells the intellectual listener how to even approach a text they might have otherwise just dismissed. It defines their role as a reader.
It does. The first approach is for the common person. They read the Bhagavatam for the stories, the drama, the enjoyment, the ananda. They just appreciate the narratives at face value.
Then you have the second approach.
The devout bhakta. This person reads it as a devotee of Krishna, focusing on devotion or bhakti. They're seeking an emotional connection.
And then there's the third way. the one that's crucial for our discussion.
The specialized reading by the Gnani. The Gnani is the intellectual, the scientist, the deep researcher, the one who seeks knowledge jhana, and this person reads the text specifically looking for deep, hidden knowledge, philosophical principles, embedded energetic secrets.
They're reading it like a scientific manual for existence.
Exactly. So for anyone in research, they have to read the Bhagavatam as a Gnani, and the methodology prescribed is very specific.
How does a researcher extract scientific principles from these, divine stories?
The method is defined as Vitakicharabali. It translates roughly to, you must actively search and read.
So it's not passive consumption.
Not at all. It's not devotional acceptance either. It requires intellectual rigor, cross-referencing, and a mind that's trained to look past the metaphor to find the underlying physical or psychological law.
So the implication here is that these stories, which seem like myths on the surface, are actually encoded with scientific principles. They're just waiting to be decrypted.
That's it. The source argues that every single Leela, every divine play or activity of Krishna, contains an amazing knowledge, Adgutamanajanam, embedded within it. The Jnani's job is to decode the hidden science.
Okay, let's try to ground this with an example, something concrete. We all know the story of Krishna lifting Govardhana Hill. How does a Gnani scientist decode that specific Leela?
Great example. So the Bhakta, the devotee, sees a literal miracle, an assertion of divine power that suspends the laws of nature.
Right.
The Gnani see something totally different. They see a profound lesson in physics, in energy management, in collective action. They don't get hung up on the literal impossibility of a boy lifting a mountain. They ask, what universal principle is this action demonstrating?
And what could those principles be?
Well, a physicist might see it as a lesson in anti-gravity, or the mastery of the fundamental forces needed to counteract mass. A deep understanding of the energy holding the mountain together. A social scientist, on the other hand, might decode it as the power of collective focus Sankapa Bala on a massive scale.
And Krishna as the single point of intelligence guiding the whole community.
Exactly. The Leela becomes a practical demonstration of how a seemingly impossible task can be achieved through non-personal universal energy application. The researcher's job is to extract that underlying law.
That completely reframes mythology. It becomes this structured, analogical framework for understanding complex systems. And the sources say there's a direct internal result from reading this way.
Yes, reading the Bhagavatam like this causes the deep internal power, the Antharlina Shakti, to become manifest and expressed, Vikakti Karana. It's not about learning something new from the outside. It's an internal revelation prompted by this intense intellectual investigation.
The researcher starts to actually feel the unlimited energy they intellectually accepted earlier.
Right. And this brings us back to the definition of Krishna in this scientific context. If the Gnani reads the text this way, who is Krishna to them internally?
It's not an external god.
No. The source is clear. For the scientist reading as a Gnani, Krishna is not someone separate. The scientist reaches the realization, I am Krishna. Or, more specifically, Krishna is understood as the enthusiasm, the utsaham within the self.
The animating force, the engine of action.
Exactly that. That internal enthusiasm is the fundamental driving force of consciousness. It's what motivates you to perform any task, any experiment, any calculation. By studying the Bhagavatam scientifically, the researcher connects the dots between the vast cosmic principles in the Leelas and the internal engine of their own enthusiasm.
This means their work isn't fueled by fleeting motivation anymore.
It's fueled by an inexhaustible, self-generated enthusiasm, which is Krishna. This process is essential for the intellectual. The ultimate goal here isn't conversion, it's maximizing performance. You're fundamentally changing your internal OS from one limited by I am the body to one empowered by I am the soul.
And that activation, that Antharlina Shakti becoming manifest, is the prerequisite for the next stage. It's the setup for actually applying that power in the world of research.
Right.
Okay, so once that deep internal power is activated through the scientific study of the Bhagavatam, that's the knowledge phase. The next critical step is application.
Right. Knowledge is potential energy. Application is kinetic energy. And this is where the Bhagavad Gita comes into play.
The sources present the Gita as the indispensable how-to manual for this newly activated self.
Exactly. It doesn't really focus on self-discovery. The Bhagavatam already covered that. It teaches the individual how to function optimally in the world, especially in the high-stakes, stressful world of research, after they have this conviction of self-knowledge.
The Gita is famous for being about action and duty, karma yoga. So how does this ancient text give practical instructions to a modern scientist who's facing deadlines, peer review, grant cycles, all of that?
It provides two primary instructions that are just vital for a researcher's stability. First, it teaches them to work without expectation of specific results. Phalanu Ashinchakunda.
Working without attachment to the fruit of the action.
Yes.
That is incredibly hard in a research environment. I mean, every grant you write, every paper you submit, it's all based on the expectation of a specific positive result. If I detach from that, how do I stay motivated?
That's the key question, and the source material clarifies what detachment means here. It does not mean apathy. It doesn't mean you don't care about the quality of your work. It means achieving intellectual and emotional stability regarding the outcome. The effort is still 100%, but your internal peace isn't held hostage by external things like a rejection letter or contradictory data.
So the scientist's stability is no longer contingent on external validation. How does that help the research process itself?
Massively. If a researcher's entire sense of self-worth is tied to getting published in that one high-impact journal, the inevitable failure, or even just the slow pace of discovery, it causes huge burnout.
Right, I can see that.
By working without attachment to the fruit, the researcher maintains this steady state of pure effort. They just keep experimenting, analyzing, refining, without that crushing emotional drain of personal disappointment. It removes the fear of failure, which is a massive inhibitor of risky, innovative thinking.
So if the researcher is a conduit for universal energy, then the pressure to deliver a specific result isn't solely on them anymore.
Exactly. Their duty is the effort, the quality of the process. The universal power delivers the result through that process. And this leads right into the second instruction from the Gita, which is all about mental balance.
Which is?
The Gita instructs the individual on how to maintain equanimity, samatva. This might be the most crucial spiritual tool for the modern scientific mind. Samatva means remaining perfectly unaffected by the extremes.
The elation of a breakthrough.
Or the despair of a failed experiment.
Huh.
You avoid that emotional volatility, the urdveka.
And research is a notorious roller coaster. You can spend 5 years on a hypothesis and then find out it was fundamentally flawed. The normal human reaction is devastation.
It is. But samatva allows the researcher to view the results impartially. A failure is just data. It's not a judgment on your worth or your competence. When you interpret results through that lens, you avoid two huge pitfalls.
Okay, what are they?
First is confirmation bias. You know, a small success inflates the ego and you become blind to flaws in your data. And the second is complete collapse, where a major failure makes you just quit that line of research entirely.
So a researcher with samatva treats success and failure as equal teachers.
They do. They're both just necessary feedback loops in the pursuit of truth. The Gita provides the structural stability you need to ride the turbulence of discovery without getting thrown off. It stabilizes the whole cognitive process.
Because if your mind is agitated, your data analysis is going to be compromised.
Your patience wears thin, your rigor suffers. Samatva ensures your internal state supports your external objective instead of sabotaging it.
This requires a huge shift in perspective about the Gita itself, though. As the source notes, the common view is, oh, the Gita is for old people, for retirement.
It's for pious people. It's seen as separate from the world of professional work.
And that view has to be corrected.
Radically.
Yeah.
The perspective has to shift to, by scientifically reading the Bhagavatam, I know who I am. I know Krishna is my internal enthusiasm. And by reading the Gita, I learn how to act with that knowledge.
With equanimity, detachment, selfless purpose. It's the operational guide for the unlimited self.
Perfect. The two texts work in perfect tandem. Bhagavatam for self-knowledge and activation, that's jnana yoga, and the Gita for application and mental stability and action, that's karma yoga.
So this combined process prepares the researcher for their work, for their battle against the unknown, with this unparalleled mental discipline.
Just as Arjuna was prepared for the war, the Yuddha, after getting Krishna's guidance, the researcher is prepared for the rigorous, emotionally demanding struggle of discovery. The ultimate preparation isn't just intellectual, it's emotional, energetic, and philosophical. And this entire framework, this bridge between unlimited potential and disciplined action, it all culminates in the source's interpretation of a critical verse from the Bhagavad Gita.
The final shloka.
Yes, the final one. It's often quoted, Yatra Yogeswara Krishna. Wherever there is Krishna, the Lord of Yoga. And this verse is presented not as poetry, but as the ultimate scientific message for a researcher. It ties everything together.
Okay, so let's deconstruct the roles in this verse. But let's take them completely off the historical battlefield and put them inside the mind of a high-performing researcher.
Exactly. In this view, Krishna, Yogeshwara, and Arjuna are not historical figures on a chariot. They are the core, interdependent components inside the researcher's own psyche.
And the chariot itself.
The chariot is the body, the senses. It's the vehicle through which the research actually gets done.
So who is the charioteer? Who is Krishna in this context?
Krishna is explicitly equated with the buddhi, the intellect, wisdom. But it's not just raw intelligence. It's the superior guiding power. It's that deep, intuitive wisdom that's been refined and calibrated by the self-knowledge you gain from the Bhagavatam.
It's the voice of reason, the ultimate knowledge, the strategic guide.
Precisely. And Arjuna is the one being guided. He's the warrior who has to perform the action.
He's the doer.
He is the doer. He represents the disciplined mind, the one who puts in the hard work, the effort. He's the executive function of the self, the dedicated worker, the panichis-vadu. Arjuna is the capacity for action. He holds the bow, he aims the arrow.
Then the meaning for the researcher is, well, it's staggering. It means you are Krishna and you are Arjuna.
Yes.
You possess the refined wisdom, the guidance of Krishna, and you possess the capacity for focused, disciplined action, which is Arjuna. This removes the dependence on external guidance, on supervisors or mentors for your ultimate direction. The guidance system is fully integrated inside you.
And when you train your mind through your intellect, your buddhi, your Krishna, when you align your wisdom with universal truth, the mind becomes what the Source calls a trained model of Vutundi.
That's fascinating. Using modern technical language to describe this ancient spiritual process, a trained model.
It's perfect, isn't it? A trained model implies an optimized, highly efficient system. It's ready for complex processing, for risk assessment, for predictive accuracy. If a researcher's mind becomes a trained model, they've achieved a state of intellectual and energetic mastery.
So the process works seamlessly. The power that elevates you, the inner wisdom, the self-knowledge, the connection to truth, that's Krishna, the guide.
And the elevated individual who then acts, who performs the research, that's Arjuna, the flawlessly executing system.
This integration, it actually answers a question from earlier. If a scientist drops the I, the limited ego, how do they maintain accountability? How do they claim intellectual property?
And the Source addresses this through karma yoga. Accountability is maintained because the duty, the karma, is performed with maximum dedication by Arjuna, the disciplined mind. The success might belong to the universal flow, but the effort belongs entirely to the individual.
So intellectual property isn't a claim of personal ego.
No, it's a recognition of the channel that allowed universal energy to manifest a beneficial outcome in the world. The researcher takes responsibility for the process, but they stay detached from the outcome.
So the underlying conclusion of this entire philosophy is that the structure of the universe is governed by science, but spirituality is the large-scale framework, the buddhi, that contains and powers that science.
Exactly. This integration provides an amazing message for all types of scientists. It asserts that you just cannot have intellectual mastery without spiritual self-mastery. It fundamentally redefines the research perspective.
Instead of seeing the lab or the supercomputer as the primary place of discovery,
the researcher has to first see the self as the primary laboratory, a lab that requires rigorous purification and optimization. By understanding that the divine guidance, Krishna, and the discipline effort, Arjuna, are two parts of the same internal system, the researcher achieves a kind of wholeness, maximum effectiveness.
This eliminates the I barrier, because the I has been expanded from the limited body to the unlimited soul, acting under the guidance of its own highly trained intellect.
And that internal alignment is the true source of limitless potential for innovation. The ultimate success isn't just the paper or the patent. It's the internal elevation of the researcher themselves.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, the scientist, the Gnani listening to this? This deep dive has shown us a profound philosophical requirement for achieving true scientific mastery, according to these sources. It's a fundamental three-step internal process.
Right. First, you have to drop the limiting personal ego, the I, and consciously access universal energy. You do that by recognizing that all great achievements stem from this superpower, manifesting through Mother Nature, or Prakriti. And that shift moves you from a finite energy source to an infinite one.
Second, you have to use the Bhagavatam as a scientist, as a Gnani. You have to employ that intellectual rigor of Vithiki Chadavali searching and reading to achieve self-activation. And that process reveals that Krishna is your own internal, inexhaustible enthusiasm, your utsaham.
Which confirms your identity as the unlimited Atma. And third, you have to use the Bhagavad Gita as your manual for selfless application for karma yoga. This means a relentless focus on equanimity, on samatva, and working without expectation of specific personal results.
And that combined process trains your mind to become that optimized model, guided by the buddhi, which is Krishna, and executed flawlessly by the disciplined mind, which is Arjuna.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture, the ultimate message for every researcher is that the greatest invention a scientist can ever make is not external.
It's not a new particle or a new compound or some new technology that will eventually be replaced anyway.
No. The greatest invention is the elevation and training of their own mind, turning their intellect, their buddhi, into a divine, perfectly calibrated guide of Krishna for their diligent efforts, their Arjuna.
That radically shifts the entire focus of the research effort. It's no longer a perpetual reliance on external things like more money or better machines.
It becomes an internal refinement process that guarantees an inexhaustible source of energy and an unwavering path to discovery. The framework asserts that the ultimate boundary of science is limited only by the spiritual integrity of the scientist.
That is a staggering thought. It transforms the act of reading these ancient texts into an essential, non-optional act of scientific preparation and professional development. And this comprehensive information on the deep interplay between science and spirituality was sourced from the detailed teachings of Venkatramana Vishnanatha.
So we'd encourage you, our learner, to consider which text, the Bhagavatam, for deep self-activation and understanding your internal engine, or the Bhagavad Gita for selfless application and maintaining equanimity in your work, which one you might approach first as an intellectual looking to connect with your unlimited self.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.